Interesting to say that both of us have the same experience, but we're vastly different people. I'm a woman, you're a
Yeah.
man, I'm an American, you're an African. An expat is usually European based. Within the African diaspora, it tends to be more migrant or immigrant.
In this criminalization and in this identity markers and perception of people, what role does psychology play?
Africans on Africa, let's go.
I'm going to hand over to Dana or Dr. Prophet to introduce herself. And welcome to Africans on Africa podcast, Dana. And I'll leave it for you to introduce yourself within this regard.
Perfect. Thank you, Ivan. It's fantastic to be here. I usually introduce myself as Dr. Dana because once you put the doctor and the prophet together, people are like, that's not real. Your name is not Dr. Prophet. I'm like, yeah, it is. So anyway, I am Dr. Dana. I'm a research psychologist, an empowerment coach, and a public speaker. And so what I like to do is really study human behavior. As you know, with our research, we really like to get in there, but I like to take people through challenges and obstacles that they go through in their life. So a lot of my public speaking and my group coaching is dedicated to that. It's dedicated to finding what's holding ourselves back in life and making friends with things that we may think are our enemies in order to get through it and really discover our purpose and things like that. So I'm an American expat. I've been in South Africa for 20 years, and I know I don't sound like it because if I try to sound like it, I sound like a drunk Australian, which I've learned in South Africa is not the best. There's a little rivalry going on between South Africans and Australians. So I generally just tend to sound like myself. I'd rather be authentic. And yeah, I've really had a great experience here. All my education is here in South Africa. So I've got my PhD from UNISA. Great experience in that regard. And yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Yeah, and I was thinking when I first met you that Dr. Prophet is the prophet, some sort of nickname or something that's happening. So I understand that Dr. Dana part, but I also like what you brought in terms of making friends with things that you usually make enemies of. And we'll get a bit into that. But I think where I wanted to start off is the point that you made in terms of being an American expat who is in South Africa, practicing in South Africa, and you also studied in South Africa. And
Yeah.
I want to take special interest in that because part of my writing and part of what I'm passionate in writing about is this aspect of the word expat and how it is used specifically for American people. But I am a migrant or a foreigner, defined as a migrant and as a foreigner in South Africa. I studied here in many institutions and I am working within this context. So I just wanted you to take me through that for you. How is the experience of being an American expat? And maybe if you can tap into the aspect of migrant and foreignhood, if you have experienced that within the South African context.
Yeah, no, that was part of my thesis, actually, my doctorate. We talked about language and how we identify ourselves. And you're right, an expat is usually European based. Within the African diaspora, it tends to be more migrant or immigrant or foreigner or things like that. So generally it's just the darn same thing. It's just what we grew up culturally with, but it can have different connotations. An expat is usually looked at somebody who comes in with an economic benefit, comes in probably with a job already, comes in with a superior lifestyle. And that's not really the case at all. And it's not the case for anybody. I consider myself an immigrant. To me, immigrants and expatriates and migrants do have different connotations, but to me, I think it's just a word that we use and we attach those labels to it. I have had a great experience coming in. I have noticed that I had an experience of welcoming arms, but not too welcome. Let me tell you, I had a fun experience when I was at UNISA at this big class, and there were hundreds of people, and we all sit at our little desks and with the microphones and all of the speakers way up in the front. And they were talking about how Americans are indoctrinated with he was trying to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Like they say this allegiance to a flag and they do all this. And I popped in and I said, it's called the Pledge of Allegiance. And 100 people turned around and looked at me. And I expected, welcoming smiles, and I expected this, and they go, and then they all turned around. So sometimes being an American is great because people are interested in exploring different parts of the world, and they want to try to travel or do something themselves. And sometimes it's like, here's the West again, trying to interfere on our turf. So I've had both experiences, but overall, it's been a great experience.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to that, and there are so many nuances that you tapped into that I want to touch on. But I guess what you mentioned, and also both our research, reading into both our research, the issue of language and the issue of identity, but also there's a work that you did there with language when you were talking about the session of expats and migrants being something that just words. And to me, I don't think they are just words. I think the words have meanings. I like the fact that you spoke about this association of identity and how we identify ourselves. I usually define identity as the narrative that you tell about yourself, but also the narrative that people tell about yourself. So you have a right to identify yourself, so people also have a right to identify you. I can give an example of the example that you gave at UNISA. How you identify yourself within a space is how you carry that aspect of your identity. But once you start to speak, and how you speak, people also identify you, and they have connotations of that aspect of your identity that can mean, we don't know how to treat you, we don't know how to connect with you in this aspect, or we have stereotypes about you and the people that we identify with you that we carry already, and that turns into the aspect of how people are treated in different spaces. And I'm so fascinated about that. And in the same breath, you also mentioned that as much as you mentioned that language, the languages that we use in terms of expat and migrants are just words, there's something that you also did in terms of saying there's an economic attachment that is used in terms of defining migrants and in terms of defining people who are expats. And for me, the question starts to be, do you think that also defines treatment? Do you think people who have that economic benefit or that economic perception, or people who come in with jobs already, are treated differently than people who are perceived as people as coming in to look for work or coming in without money?
Oh, definitely. I've seen that. We've all seen that in the South African papers with xenophobic violence and things like that. And while I want to touch base on how I said that they're just words and they're interchangeable to me, they are not interchangeable to other people. This is the culture and the indoctrination that I grew up with those words makes them interchangeable, but I understand the different perspective from other countries and other cultures may have different connotations for them. So yeah, it's that identity thing, and that what we attach and what we perceive others to be is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I believe they are. Unfortunately, I did find in my studies that there are certain countries around the world, including South Africa, that tend to be a little bit more I would say economically fearful of foreigners because they are afraid the resources are low. They're going to come and take jobs. They're going to come and take this. So they tend not to be as welcoming towards what you would say a migrant would be towards another thing of what an expat coming in who is economically stable and who already has a job and things like that would be. They're definitely treated different. But I think that comes from fear. I think it comes from scarcity of resources. I don't think it comes from an internal hatred of foreigners or an internal, like of foreigners. In America, we really like to learn about different cultures. Here, there tends to be a different outlook, a little bit of a mistrust towards foreigners because of the scarcity of resources. So I think that they're definitely treated differently. And not always one is good and one is bad. They're interchangeable. It depends on the individual who is perceiving them and what their perceptions are and stereotypes and identity markers are.
Yeah, yeah. And I like that you segued into that part, because I think it goes into the conversation that we're also planning to have in that regard. And there are parts of that I don't agree with, in a sense, because I think there is a fear, and you tagged it an economic fear, and also like apart from the fear, there is a conflict which is brewing from a sense of scarcity of resources, and I think all of those are perceptions. And if we take where you ended your statement at, I think stereotypes and prejudices feed into this aspect of informing people about identity markers, because identity markers are formed by these stereotypes and not challenging these stereotypes. Why I say it's a perception is because when you have identity markers that are based from stereotypes, it disrupts you from this process of wanting to learn or interacting or even engaging with people who are different or people who you have tagged as different. I think the ideal perception is what we have seen currently in the United States, or the protest that happened recently in the UK, right? Where people were actually saying we don't want to engage with people who have these identity markers because they have connotations and stereotypes of either race or being criminalized or anything of that sort. And I think that plays a role in this perception of a fear or perception of scarcity of resources, because in a real sense the resources are not scarce, but because you don't want to engage with these people and you have these identity markers, you're interacting with them in a sense that those stereotypes will keep you in any form or shape from interacting with them. And I think where it gets to be very interesting and fascinating for me is in this criminalization and in this identity markers and perception of people, what role does psychology play in creating these aspects?
Well, psychology is all about human behavior, and humans need to interact. I mean, we talk about, the scarcity of the South African towards a foreigner or a migrant who might take their job, but there's also stereotypes from your higher level people who have ethnocentricity, that they believe their culture is better. And then they come to a different culture and they're like, oh, we do things differently. Our way is so much better. So it comes from both ends. It's not just one end. And psychology teaches human to find common ground. They teach us that we're all the same. We all have a needs hierarchy that needs to be filled to live a fulfilling life. We all have emotions, and we have emotional intelligence at varying levels. We all have cultural intelligence at varying levels. It teaches us to reach out and understand human behavior. And the more you understand human behavior, the more you realize there's not much difference between us except these outside labels and these perceptions. And so I think psychology is much needed, and it's very important. It's developed itself into different genres like depth psychology, analytic, or person-centered psychology, which is big here in Africa. But it's the same thing. It's reaching out and building humanity, in my opinion.
And I also think there is something that we don't talk about a lot. And for me, that's what drove me into this field that we are both passionate about in terms of research psychology. Apart from being rejected into clinical psychology, of course, I think there is.
I never wanted clinical
foundation.
psychology. I always wanted to study groups.
I-
How does this happen to 500 people at a time?
Yeah, I didn't know that I wanted this aspect of research psychology until I bumped into it by being rejected into clinical psychology, and I had a heartbreak. And
It was a little
I
bit,
never
yeah.
really
We all
applied
want to help
again.
others, and there's a lot of people who want to be
Yeah.
therapists and counselors and stuff. And funnily enough, even though I do master classes and things for groups of people, I've realized that I want to understand, and I can understand more with research than I can with one-on-one coaching. It's interesting
Yeah.
that way, but that's how I really, really love being a research psychologist.
Yeah, and I think it delves into that part, what I was about to say, in the sense that I think psychology essentially set the foundation for the perceptions that are carried through currently, and the way that people, the identity markers that we see in this world currently. Psychology laid that foundation, and it's that foundation that we can't really uproot today. As much as we are trying, that system still carries through. And what I mean by that is, if you look at people like John Locke and how they started to study psychology and started to study groups of people and behavior, that's when the conversation of tagging people like savages, or any other markers of identity that define people as not people started. And I think it carried through in the development of psychology, where people where psychology was mainly also focused on categorizing people and seeing who are savages and who are not savages. And I think it carried through with mental health and wellness and aspects of how we treat people and how we treat mental health, or try to categorize people who are mentally unwell. We see how mental institutions have evolved or are still evolving, but those practices are still in play. And my question to that, and the conversation that I want to open up to within that regard, is, do you think psychology is reaching the people that it was intended for, the people that it was designed to help? In a sense, you said we all want to help people, but is it reaching the people that it was intended for? In the sense that the people who are the most plagued by psychopathology, people who are most plagued by personality disorders, are they the ones that are the most significantly reached by psychology?
Well, the thing about it is knowledge and, well, basically everything we do, including psychology, has to begin with a framework. That framework is put into people who have the power to get it out there. And for a while, that was the white man, and, the other was the savages. So that was a label they put on them. I am blessed that we do not live in that world anymore. But we start with frameworks, and then we realize what works and what doesn't work. Now, psychology has to label things to understand them. Then you can break that apart. Your main focus in research is to destroy your hypothesis. It's to prove it wrong. And so I think that needs to happen more often. We need to question our frameworks, and we need to open up different ways of thinking. And I think oftentimes we get stuck in paradigms or theoretical paradigms. This is the right one and this is how it works, and we must not question it, because if we follow the rules, then it's been proven. No. In my opinion, no. We need to think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, because I do agree with you very significantly on that note, but also we are research psychologists. We have to not agree with the conventional, but also there's a part that you mentioned that I think one of the things that make me agree with that is that we are still living in the old world. You say, thankfully, we are not living in that. I think there are parts of us that are still living in it. Seriously, because that conversation that we're having.
I don't want to admit it.
Look at how migration is perceived currently in the world, not in South Africa, but in the world, how much of a topic it is, and how much it is rooted in the othering, how much it is rooted in this conventional way of thinking and treating others and perceiving others and creating this category of others. So I think also, I don't agree with that part. I think we are still living within this old-fashioned, old conventional aspect of psychology and others. But also, I think in what you were driving to, our role as psychologists and the role of psychology is to disrupt that and to question that and not to live within the theoretical framework. Sorry, continue.
No, I think that's very important, and I'm was hoping by my statement that we weren't living in a world of white power and savages. I know it's not equal yet, but I was a little bit more than that. But I know that some people's experiences disprove that, and that's very sad in my opinion. But getting back to the labels and the frameworks, we need to say that somebody has a mental illness, or they've been plagued by disruption of the mind or something. We need to start by putting them in that category, and then we can break out of it, and then we can find alternative ways to do that. Now, is psychology helping the people that it was meant to help? I think that's a different question. I think it is accessibility. Are the people who really need the help getting access to it? That's the real question. And I don't think so. I mean, South Africa has such different urban societies, rural societies. Is everybody getting the top-notch help that they can get? Definitely not. I don't think so. And I think that's an accessibility question.
And I love the fact that you went to this aspect of accessibility, because I think it defines what we are not doing in psychology or what psychology is currently not doing. And I think the irony of it is if psychology was designed in such a way that it defined the other as savages or the other who doesn't belong. It is not actually using the inventions that it took from that to help that other or to help that savage acclimatize to what the normal being is. I don't believe in normalcy or anything of that
Yeah.
sense, because I think that access aspects really questions what psychology is doing or if it's doing what it was intended to do, because if we discovered all these aspects, if the DSM actually is DSMing as it is supposed to, there is still people who can't access these resources, not only in terms of the economic aspect also, but I also think in terms of practice, I think practice hasn't reached the other areas, and people who are still othered and ignored by practice, which gets into the aspect that I wanted to also talk about in terms of you mentioned this aspect of framework. And thinking of framework, I want to get into empowerment coaching. How does that framework fit into this, and how does that tap into and disrupt psychology? Because I think I didn't even want to read too much into empowerment coaching, because it's something that I honestly in my history of psychology that I met through you, right? So how do you come up with empowerment coaching, and how does it disrupts psychology, but also how, if you've applied, I don't know if you've applied it in the US and South Africa, having acquired your PhD in South Africa, but take me through that a bit more, the framework and also different contexts.
Yeah, well, to me, as I said earlier, psychology is about human behavior. We are all humans. We all face challenges. We all have emotional needs. We all have physical needs, housing, food, security, things like that. We have all of those things. But we also all share negative self-talk. We all share this internal bully that's inside of us that, regardless of our circumstances, we all have it. And to me, that's human behavior. It's not any different. Empowerment is psychology to a lot of places. I'm not addressing pathological situations. I'm not addressing, bipolar patients or this or that. My audience is the person who has this inner bully inside of them and wants to overcome it and be the legend that we all have inside of ourselves. So to me, that is psychology. It's human behavior. So what I try to do is disrupt the paradigms. I'm not going on a person-centered approach I'm going on a bit of a Jungian approach, or Freudian approach, or this or that. I'm looking at a person by themselves and saying, let's talk underneath all of these boxes and these frameworks and these paradigms, and let me talk to the inside of you. Let me get you going. And so I find that it is psychology, but it's certainly not following any of the rules.
Yeah. And I love how it also disrupts every other aspect and does not follow the rules, because I think psychology has done a lot of bringing the Freudian approach and applying it in different contexts where it doesn't really fit. And also,
Yes.
like, people have for a long time wanted, and I think as students also we there was a point where we yearned to actually call ourselves Freudian psychologists and to be the best Freudian psychologists, or to be psychodynamics and all of that, So I think for me it's exciting to have this aspect of psychology being disrupted, but I want to challenge that a bit in terms of your framework, also emanating from a point of I am a person who believes in African psychology, but also in the fact that African psychology hasn't formed, but is still in the process of forming. So how do you, if I come to you and say, I have a bully in me, but I'm also a person who is rooted strongly. I'm that person, that other who we're not talking about, who access has not been provided to, How do you, Dr. Dana, help me in terms of that using your framework?
Well, we have to delve into your indoctrinations, your cultural references, all of these kind of things, and find a way to tie it in. Again, that's what I think psychology does and human behavior does. It ties people together in different ways. And by thinking outside the box, I can take my one approach. Okay, we're going to do Carl Jung's active imagination. So I did a little bit of framework there,
Yep.
but then I pull it out and do my own thing. So I'll say, well, if you were indoctrinated to think that your troubles stem from this, let's work around that. I meet them in their space. So I don't try to drag somebody into a framework that doesn't really work for them, because we are all different and we all have different upbringings. We all have different family roles. We all have different, experiences in life. So you can't just take this one person and block them in my framework. I need to take my framework as a psychologist and adapt it. And I think not a lot of psychologists do that. I think a lot of them, like you said, I'm going to be a Freudian therapist. I'm going to be a person-centered Rogerian therapist. I'm going to be this. No, I don't think that that's possible. I think there are 8.5 billion individuals on this earth, and we really have 8.5 billion different experiences and circumstances. So let's meet in the middle and find the way to overcome your negative narrative or your challenge or your trauma in life.
Yeah, I always think about it as reconciling the psychology that we know with the psychology that our communities require, because there is a lot that is required by our communities, and our psychology is not stepping up to giving that or providing that to the communities within which we exist. Our communities deserve more than just a Freudian approach or just a copy paste of any other approach. Our community,
and I think that's what too many psychologists do. They stick to an approach and they stick to a framework, and that is a problem. And I noticed that is a problem in I don't want to say inexperienced therapists, but I do know I am a better psychologist now that I'm in my mid-50s than I ever was in my 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, and South Africans, a young, vibrant, community. And, do they have enough experience to help somebody through a violent trauma? They know the practicals that they learned in their textbooks, but do they have enough experience to work their way around the psyche of an individual that has their own life and experiences and indoctrinations and trauma? That is the problem to me. I think that unfortunately we all want to help. We all want to be fulfilled. We all want to fulfill things, Maslow's hierarchy, but is there enough experience in the people who are being the psychologists to help their clients?
And I think there is, I think experience will never occur in the absence of immersion, because I don't think we immerse ourselves within the cultures that we exist in or the cultures that we function in, and I think it takes us back to where we started from, because there is also an arrogance that knowledge has, where knowledge comes in and doesn't have to immerse itself in people's culture and people's knowledge, but has this arrogance of saying you have to immerse yourself within the knowledge that I'm bringing because it's top notch, it's from the best, which in a sense subliminally says you are not the best. And I think that arrogance also breeds resistance. And it takes us back to what we're talking about in terms of there's a perception of people not immersing themselves in communities, and that breeds that perception of resistance where people say, oh, you don't belong here, you don't speak my language, you don't speak the language that I have, or you don't represent the person that I am, or you are not bleached enough for the people that I know, Yeah. And I think there is an effort to reimagine not only ourselves and to reimagine societies to fit, not to fit, but also to be multicultural enough to accept, to blend, and to, and I guess it starts with the disruption of knowledge, which ends with the disruption of society and the disruption of communities, which we are not doing enough of, honestly.
The thing about it is disruption can be a loaded gun. Disruption can lead ultimately to anarchy, which is not good, but we were given brains to question. And we were, I'm going to tell you a funny story. I once was very proud of one of my assignments in university, and I got a 52 percentage on it. I was horrified.
Yeah.
And I asked the professor, why did I get a 52? And the professor said, your arguments were great. Your communication style is wonderful. You've got great concepts, but you put the number of the page in the wrong spot. And I'm like, you're telling me that I brought great concepts, questions to the table, and things like that. But because I did not follow this framework of putting a number in the right-hand corner versus the middle or something like that,
You are not existing in the system.
I was, it was punitive against myself. I hurt my grade. And there's too much of that. There is too much of that. And we need to, like you said, we need to meet different paradigms. My professor said, you got great concepts. So why not give me a plus on that, rather than just saying, well, just because you did this one thing, not according to our rules and our framework and our system, you are penalized. So I don't understand the blindly following of the education, or we're giving this education to you and we are right and you don't know anything, you're this blank slate. I think we need to explore communities and get back to different families. I often am in a place where I am one of the only Caucasians. We travel around Africa, all over the place. We look, and people kind of do look and stare at me. But I'll tell you what, once I start talking to them, there's no space anymore. There's no gap, because people get along with smiles and energy, and people who try to outreach. People are often afraid to take a step out of what they know, because they're afraid of rejection, or they may not follow their framework, or they may do something wrong. But I'm telling you what, once we start mixing and melding and disrupting, not to an anarchist point, but disrupting the norms, we really get along, and we really find that we're all just peoples. That's what I find.
Yeah. I think there's this hesitancy towards anarchy, and I think homeostasis is defined by this balance, right? A bit of both, finding the middle ground, and I think without anarchy, we wouldn't have evolved or established or discovered as much as we have. I'm not an anarchist in any sense of the word, but I think the world is now filled with this fear of progressing into anarchy. I can take the US society as an example. It's so divided in the middle that it's either you are this or that, so much so that we can't even have a conversation even about womanhood or pregnancy or anything of that sort, because it's either or. And both sides are afraid of going into anarchy, and they think the other side is both of them are progressing into anarchy. It's either the left or the right. Literally, it's divided between the two sides, whereas there is parts of the two sides which everyone can tap into. That's why maybe centrists now are coming up and saying there could be a middle point. We don't want to be either woke or even defined as that, but also we don't want to be conservative or even be defined as that. But there are parts of both that can exist, and that's what coexisting comes to. I think, and that's part of the world that we are failing to live in. And thinking of that part of coexisting, I want to tap into what you spoke about in terms of existing or coexisting in the South African space, and maybe as the only Caucasian person, I'm thinking of your experience of existing in that space. How do you approach that space? And I'm trying to think of it as when people look at you, what does that entail to you, and how do you occupy that space? Because before I even go into how I occupy it, maybe as a black body or as a foreigner occupying that space.
I just occupy it as an energy that is welcoming new situations. I know people look at me out of mistrust, or they haven't, especially when we go into lots of parts of Africa, sometimes, because it's that status that, okay, so I've got decent clothes, I've got money to spend at the shops or things like that. So it can be a little bit of mistrust, but it's also just the otherness that we talked about. And I know to break down the barrier between other is to reach out. Every time I talk to somebody, they're like, oh my God, I love your energy, or I love what you're talking about. Or even if we disagree, it doesn't matter, because I strive to make connections. I don't want that space or that gap to divide people, because people, like you said, they're so divided. They're so extreme right now. And that's not what we need as a civilization. We need to blend. We need to cohabit. And we need to realize that maybe our indoctrinations or our stereotypes are bringing divides, and we're human. We all are human.
Yeah.
That's what psychology is all about. It's all about bridging gaps and understanding behavior. So if I'm, somewhere like on Kilimanjaro or something like that, and I'm in a small little village around there, I understand that there is an otherness, but it doesn't have to be. You know what I mean? Let's bridge that gap. Let's cohabitate. Let's reach out and find a common denominator. So I find that, if I notice there's space, I immediately just like reach out to close that space and show people we're not different.
Yeah, and what's weird about my thought process right now is that I'm thinking of how you interpreted your identity and existing within a South African space, and what I want to say might also be me, talking about your identity, and I think that's the definition that I give for identity. So let's get into it.
Okay.
I understand that you say it's mistrust, and I think going on the aspect that you spoke about in terms of having nice clothes, but also being different within that space. I'm thinking of it from a point of view where that's the feeling that I get. And I think the mistrust is different, or I experience it as different, because also I'm experiencing your identity, maybe in the sense that when people look at me, I start to perceive the mistrust, because there is this connotation or treatment. Not always. I have people who treat me very amazingly in South Africa.
No, this isn't blanket.
It's not blanket, but there's an experience of blackness being looked at as like foreign, like what we spoke about, and this misconception of, this person is here to threaten me, not to aid me, But I'm just surprised that that's the experience that you feel as well in terms of the mistrust aspect. Maybe you want to break down the mistrust aspect in detail. I'm not saying you should change it. I'm just saying, like, when I heard it, I saw my experience, but my experience is explained through the xenophobic attitudes, some of the aspects, not even my own, but also aspects of other people's experiences that I've seen.
Quite interesting to say that both of us have the same experience, but we're vastly different people. I'm a woman, you're a man, I'm an American, you're an African. It's so funny to show you that we are all the same. Now, when I experience people looking at me and feeling othered, I try to go into their shoes, and I feel that it's just fear, or it could be, I don't trust, she's a Westerner, she's going to try to impose her feelings on me or her ethnocentricity on me, which I might have inadvertently done when I first moved here. So that's where I go in my mind. I might have thought, well, why are they doing this when we do that? But I've gotten over that. But I can still see a little bit of thinking, what are they thinking about me? And I just try to bridge that gap. So I am just experiencing it and instantly jumping out of my skin and trying to jump into their skin and look at myself and see what they're seeing. And I find, again, just bridging that gap, just smiling and reaching out and saying hello and, doing anything that bridges the gap immediately. So then there's nothing for me to think about anymore. They're not looking at me like she's an other. They're not looking at me like, she doesn't belong. They're looking at me like, oh, hey, this chick is pretty cool. Because I am.
Yeah, I think we also don't talk. We also don't talk enough about how navigating social spaces is hard. I think it also comes back from those stereotypes that we spoke about. Because we also have perceptions of how people are perceiving us, and then we think to ourselves, "Oh, for me to be accepted, I need to behave in certain ways." And I think that's the fascinating thing about me with human behavior. With it is that while we are interacting within this interaction, I'm thinking about how you're thinking about this conversation, and maybe you're thinking the same as well. And that influences our behavior, that influences how we act, but also that brings out the sameness in humanity, which we don't really speak about a lot of the times, which I think psychology should go. And I think human research psychology should tap into a lot more.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I think that's the point of research psychology, is to find out the drivers of human behavior and then find ways to either bridge gaps or enforce better perceptions or something. I think that the whole point is not just to research and go, oh, we have found this, but what does it do for society? How can it help society? I put this whole thing in my thesis about how this research can help. I have like 5 pages of how, this research can help. And they're kind of like, Dana, you're going off the deep end here. I'm like, but why? Why do we just have to sit there and uncover knowledge? Let's apply it. Let's get it out there. Let's find out what's going on and what we can do to better society. Because it's the whole point. Why just understand it? Let's work together and make us all even better. And that's where my empowerment coaching comes in. I really like to meet people and to find out their drivers and to find out what is good going on in their life and might be not so good going on in their life, and teach them how to have the tools to overcome things. We all have the same kind of drivers. We all have the same inner bully. We all have the same, not circumstances and life experience. That's vastly different, but we all have emotional states which are relatively the same. We all have these things that can bridge the gap and make our lives better. And that's where I come from.
Yeah. And I think you said something really powerful when you said like the need to continue learning, and I think that makes the difference for me between psychology and research psychology, where it's like we can never say we have all the answers. In philosophy they say I know I'm going to offend a lot of people who do conventional psychology and who are clinical psychologists, but I don't care. Like we can never say we have had the answers. We want to continually disrupt. We want to continually discover. We want to continually experiment and see the full potential of human beings. We're not saying we have the answers and the practice and everything. I think that's the point of what our work should be. And I think you said it. You would put a research paper and say, I have these answers. No, we don't have answers, and we have to continue being inquisitive and being curious. And I think humans we haven't even explored our full potentials, and that's where we should go. Dr. Dana, I'm gonna ask you for your parting shots. I know we have a lot more to talk about, and I want to do more of this, but I'm going to ask for your parting shots in terms of everything that we are talking about, and possibly how you think we can reimagine society, the world, and even psychology.
Yeah, no, I think we need to reimagine the world. Like you said, we are living in extreme circumstances and in polarities and in hatred and things like that. And I think it's a cycle. I think it's a natural human cycle. Life goes through cycles, biology goes through cycles, science goes through cycles. We will always have different circumstances as a generation to learn from, and within our own cultures to learn from, and society. We have so many things influencing us as human beings that, yes, we should always be learning, and we don't have the answers. Psychology builds the frameworks. It might have had a framework that fit 50 years ago, but that human being is not living in that same society of 50 years ago. So like you said, let's question it. Let's disrupt it. Let's not go into anarchy. That's not good for anybody.
Let's not be afraid of anarchy.
Right? God gave us a brain. If you believe God, the universe, your parents, whatever, gave you a brain, use that brain for critical skills thinking, use it for question. questioning. I think we touched on a lot of different things. I think we could go so much deeper in so many different conversations, and I would love to at a certain point. And I think that we both have such different life experiences that it would be good for us to talk about it and explore the things for the audience so they can realize, that they experience things that we do, as a podcaster and a presenter and a participant. We can share experiences maybe that people don't really know to talk about it. And we can use our research background and our future research background to help give some answers. Like you said, they're never going to be final answers, but they might be eye-opening or provide next steps so somebody can jump off that platform or somebody can jump off that platform. That's what research and psychology and human behavior is all about. And I love being a part of it. I just want to thank you so much.
Amazing.
This has been so much fun. I hope we do it again.
Thank you so much, and I hope we do it again. We have so many topics that we can open, and we touched a bit on language. Like that's a wormhole that we can go into culture, identity. Each one of those, and obviously you are someone that we're going to work with in terms of exploring all those topics. And I like how we spoke about this aspect of regardless of all our differences, there's aspects of sameness that come into the conversation, but also our experiences do not deter our sameness to come out or to shine, so to speak. And I think this is something that we have to continue to talk about, something that we have to continue engaging in. And I want to hear what people think as well about this topic in terms of not only Africanness, not only in terms of Americanness, identities, the politics of belonging, othering, but also aspects of psychology and how it fits into the world. Can we start to question if it is doing the work that it intends to be doing or the work that it purports to be doing? My name is Ivan Munashe, and thank you, Dr. Dana, for joining, and it has been a splendid episode. Until next time.
Thank you so much.
Africans on Africa.